My life is essentially an aesthetic experience. Everything that I know, everything I take in, every idea I have, comes to me through my senses.
Hey everyone, on this week's episode, I sit down with the aesthete extraordinaire, Leonard Koren. If you're not familiar with him, Leonard is perhaps best known as the author of the cult 1994 book Wabi-Sabi for artists, designers, poets, and philosophers, and before that as the creator of the counterculture publication Wet, the magazine of gourmet bathing. In addition to Wabi-Sabi, Leonard, who's now based in Rome after nearly a lifetime in California, is the author of more than a dozen other books, including the recently reissued Undesigning the Bath. Through much of his writing, Leonard crafts language to describe what so many creators and artists have long struggled to find the right words for. There is a certain economy and essentialism to his books. They aren't long, and they certainly aren't verbose, and that's by design. His texts are philosophical and meditative guideposts for ways of being, seeing, thinking, making, and feeling. They are, in a certain sense, celebrations of art and beauty, and in turn, living more fully. As someone who first entered the worlds of art, architecture, and design through the back door of journalism, I've long found Leonard's work to be instructive and incredibly mind-expanding. As you'll hear, his aesthetic perspectives are the opposite of pretentious. They're refreshingly accessible, open to anyone wishing to engage and appreciate them. In our conversation, you'll hear him get deep into his loves of bathing, the Japanese tea ceremony, and bookmaking, as well as the idea of looking at your life as an ongoing aesthetic experience. Before we get into the episode, I'd first like to thank our Season 11 presenting sponsor, L'École School of Jewelry Arts, which is supported by the Maison Van Cleef and Arpels. With the mission of sharing the art and culture of jewelry with the general public, L'École's offerings range from courses on art history and introductory jewelry making and gemology to books and publications, from public lectures and talks to exhibitions such as Paris, City of Pearls, and Shakudo, from samurai ornaments to jewelry. L'École also makes a podcast called Voice of Jewels. Through a combination of narration and insights from art historians, jewelry experts, and L'École lecturers, each Voice of Jewels episode delves into the secrets and lore behind history's most mythic jewels. Season 7 explores how various writers, actors, and poets, whether J.R.R. Tolkien or Jean Cocteau, have forged literary masterpieces from jewels, gems, and precious metals. Season 8, meanwhile, highlights treasure troves, from one found submerged in the Java Sea to another discovered inside Andy Warhol's New York apartment. To learn more about L'École and Voice of Jewels, head to www.l'ecolevancleefarpels.com. That's www.LECOLEVANCLEEFARPELS.com. You can also find Voice of Jewels on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And now, here's my conversation with Leonard. Hi, Leonard. Welcome to Time Sensitive.
Thank you.
I think we have to start this conversation on the subject of bathing. It's an obvious place to start with you, and specifically the relationship between time and bathing. In your recently reissued book, Undesigning the Bath, which you originally published in 1996, you note, "To bathe is to fall into step with your biological rhythms, in and out breathing, the speed of blood coursing through your veins, the slowness of tiredness. The mechanical world of objective time, seconds, minutes, hours, is irrelevant here. Taking a bath properly requires being able to guiltlessly linger, hang out, and or do nothing whatsoever." So tell me how you think about bathing from a temporal perspective.
Well, I think that's the way I still feel about it. For myself, frankly, I enjoy bathing the most when I bathe alone, because then I could actually tune into all these things. Recently, I was in an experience where I took saunas with people once or twice a day, a group of really beautiful, wonderful people. But the social dimension of it was paramount. All that concentration on inner processes and the metaphysical aspect of bathing dissolved. It was totally a social experience. So it really depends on the context and the purpose of the bathing experience. But again, in any bathtub, any shower, no matter what it looks like, as long as the water doesn't make me shiver, yes, time is suspended.
Have you found that many of your best ideas come to you in the bath?
I think that when your blood moves in a certain way and your brain gets oxygenated and supercharged, and bathing is one of the modes of doing that, yes, I have ideas, but I don't know about best.
On the subject of this book, Undesigning the Bath, you note how, quote, the manner in which timelessly beautiful inns and temples in Kyoto continually renew themselves is illustrative. And pulling out this time notion, how do you view that in connection with the bath, these inns and temples?
Gosh, I haven't thought about that in a long time. It's a book called Undesigning the Bath. And it was a little bit polemical. It was a reaction to the slick modernist baths that I experienced many times, which are formally very beautiful to me, but don't seem to need a bather to fulfill their mission. In other words, they are complete in themselves. So part of the book Undesigning the Bath is a kind of poetic guide to making baths that have the superior qualities I think bathing environments should have. And the inns at Kyoto, the way they are maintained, is a good example of maintaining environments. So that's the context for that phrase.
Well, and I read in one of the footnotes that it was this bathing experience you had at a Norman Foster designed bath that sort of led you on this path of writing the book. Is that right?
Yes, it was gorgeous, and in a real estate sales brochure sort of way. But the experience was almost dehumanizing, and it made me feel really bad. Subsequent to that, I've been to Vals, Switzerland, which is another Peter Zumthor's bath house, which again is formally beautiful. And I admire it in so many ways. Yet both times I've bathed there, I've come away feeling like, that was a shitty bath.
You don't hear that take often, but people so focus on the visual aesthetic qualities of Vals and maybe less the sensual ones or sensory.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. I mean, Vals itself, have you been to Vals?
No.
Okay, so what you look out on when you're in the outdoor pool and you look out on the hill on the opposite end of the valley, it's the most bizarre landscape you could imagine. It's diabolical. It's not paradisical. There's something strange. So you have this magnificent architecture plopped down in an environment that is not harmonious with it. So I think there's a big disconnect. That's part of it. For me, cerebrally processing it, things just didn't make sense. And then the surfaces are very hard. The space is very grand. I think a lot of people feel what I did on a subliminal level, but they may not allow themselves to actually express it because it's certainly a contrarian point of view.
On that tip, what would be one of your greatest bathing experiences of all time? And then excluding Vals and the Norman Foster project in Tokyo you mentioned, what would be the worst?
I had one bath in when I was involved with tea ceremony. I was the tea master in a hot spring in Oregon in the middle of winter during a snowstorm with all the tea utensils floating on the surface. And that was quite a beautiful image. But that wasn't my greatest or favorite bathing experience. The one that comes immediately to mind is really crazy. It was last winter or the winter before in a rental apartment for a few days in Zurich, Switzerland, that had this large bathtub in the apartment and great hot water. And I would take a bath early in the morning. I felt my whole being coming together in that bath. And that was an ideal bathing experience. The worst one was during the wet days, I'd say. We had one investor in Wet Magazine, and it was a very wonderful, curmudgeonly billionaire named Max Plevsky. He was an early investor in a lot of tech companies that are famous today. And he had Craig Elwood design a compound for him in Palm Springs. And they traveled all over the world to various places, Morocco, Budapest, many places, to make sure that this bathing environment was in alignment with the highest standards of the time. So there was a cruciform-shaped hot tub next to the swimming pool outside. And he said, Wet, you guys, I'm in New York, so you guys, if you want to use my Palm Springs compound while I'm gone, please do. So the problem was that the water temperature in the cruciform hot tub was just a few degrees below the temperature you need to sustain your body temperature. So it was cold, in other words. And it was like hell. And finally, we managed to disturb Max. He was getting maybe a massage at some exotic place. And he told me where his maintenance person was. And in 24 hours, we fixed it. But those 24 hours to have a very appealing environment, and in fact, the whole purpose of the trip was to bathe, and then not being able to do so was unpleasant.
Back to the connection between how perhaps the visual reality might not actually add up to what is occurring in the real world.
Exactly.
I mean, in that case, though, it's just a very specific moment in time and the thing's not working.
Yeah. No, I think that's often the case. Our whole world has become so visually attuned, and we assume that what we see is what is. And that's a shame. I remember reading once that roses, once they started putting roses in catalogs so that you could buy, your new roses, that the smell of roses became of much less importance than the way they look. So that's why roses don't smell as much as they used to.
Yes, some are practically smell free now. I mean,
yeah,
there's no scent.
But there's a spray that you could spray on them to make them smell.
And a color.
Yeah. And they're even, you're even caffeinated.
So you've spoken so much about Wet, the magazine of gourmet bathing, over the years, including with me in the Slowdown newsletter. So I don't want to overdo it today, but for the uninitiated, this was a magazine published between 1976 and 1981, mainly based out of Venice, California. You produced 34 issues with covers featuring the likes of Mick Jagger, Richard Gere, and Debbie Harry, amongst other provocative covers. It was, as you've put it, a wholehearted embrace of the absurd. Just share a bit about the publication with the listeners, and also what you think about its staying power over the past 5 decades. Because I think that's really fascinating. Like, why do you think Wet still holds so much attention and fascination?
Well, Wet, the magazine of gourmet bathing, if you haven't heard of it, it still seems a little absurd. It seems less so now, because even the idea of a magazine about gourmet bathing has been absorbed by the culture. About a year and a half ago in Rome, I was asked to do a show about Wet. I usually say no, but I thought it might be a good way to meet people in my new hometown, and put a number of the images from Wet up very large in this museum space. I was surprised that they're still potent and relevant. So I think that in some weird way, I tapped into some kind of archetypical mode of design, similar to like Louis Kahn or Irving Penn, that transcends the particular cultural moment. In other words, it's archetypal imagery. So I think that's part of what visually makes wet still relevant to some people. I also think that the approach to making wet, there's a good methodology. It was accidental methodology, but a good one, and allowed the creators a lot of freedom. There were some guidelines, no gratuitous violence, no quote-unquote inferior work. It was a venue for people to experiment, and a lot of interesting creators contributed to wet. So that might be part of it. But other than that, I have no idea.
If you could pick one anecdotal moment or experience or thing that happened from your wet era, what would come to mind for you? What would you say is a standout anecdote?
Gosh. Well, actually, the best ones I can't say because I'd embarrass some celebrities. No, I would say that instead of answering that question, I'll just say that it was a really seminal learning experience for me. I learned about business. I learned about relationships with other artists and creative people. I learned about all the things you could do wrong in business. I learned about immorality, not in a standard Judeo-Christian sense, but in a real human exchange sense. And I think it set me on the path to do better afterwards.
While we're on the wet subject, we do have to talk about gourmet bathing. What a great phrase. I mean, and you've written that gourmet bathing is, quote, a means of enjoying the world, not a system or a therapy or philosophy. At most, a view of having something to do with sensuality, humor, humility, and taking such pleasure in small things that they stop being small. Actually,
those very specific words are not mine.
Oh.
They're one of the wonderful people who worked for WET named Charlie Haas, who I asked Charlie one day, can you write an essay about what gourmet bathing is about?
Well, they're beautiful, and I love this sentiment, and I just feel like we should all be using more of that in our lives. Like, I think we could all use a little more gourmet bathing, in other words.
Yes, of course. I mean, some people are able to use words that propel us into these wonderful realms of imaginative, contemplative, higher order being. And Charlie was one of those people, is one of those people. What was your question?
There wasn't a question. I was just bringing up gourmet bathing. But I guess if I were to turn it into a question, I did want to quote from this piece in the New York Times that the design journalist Pilar Veladas wrote in 2005. She wrote, "You could say that Koren has spearheaded the design equivalent of the slow food movement." I was thinking about that in the context of the term gourmet bathing and wondering if you think that there is some connection between gourmet bathing and slow food, even in an outstretched way, and what would that be? How do you see it?
Well, gourmet bathing pre-existed slow food by many years. And in fact, so the way the term gourmet bathing came about was I used to make bath art pieces. Instead of becoming an architect after my graduate architecture school experience, I decided to make art about bathing environments and experiences. Many lovely people modeled for me, and to repay them, I convinced the owners of a funky old Russian Jewish bathhouse in LA to let me throw a bath party for the night. I made the invitation purposely ambiguous. People didn't know what to expect. They had never been to a bath party before. And there were 150 people. It was just crazy enough. And the people were a really good frames of mind, and they were all good people, that it created a lot of what I called social energy. And I had never created anything that was so successful before. I was 29 and I felt, geez, I did something right. I got to do something with it. And again, it took me a while to process it. But when I was taking a bath one afternoon, because that's when I usually would take a bath, not in the morning and not in the night, but in the middle of the afternoon during this period of my life, it just popped into my head. I should start a magazine about gourmet bathing. Now, in terms of the influences, my girlfriend at the time subscribed to Gourmet magazine, which was about food, which I thought was an utterly absurd magazine. The way they venerated, special sauces and or preparations that took many hours to complete. So it was embedded in my consciousness. I admired it. I mean, I didn't think it was in a demeaning way. I greatly admired that people were so committed to their niche interests. Also, Vogue magazine, the dogmatism. I think maybe it was the Diana Vreeland era. I just loved it. I mean, I just loved that somebody could be like an aesthetic guru and just say, it's red this year. and people would follow. So the Gourmet probably comes from Gourmet magazine. When some words are co-joined, there's just a kind of spark that comes to your mind. And I came out of the bath and I told my girlfriend, I'm thinking of starting a magazine about gourmet bathing. What do you think about the idea? And she knew what a kind of person I was. She said, yeah, it's probably a good idea.
And then you had Wet, which also led to this, in a roundabout way, engagement with Japan, or vice versa. I mean, post-Wet, one of your bathing-related projects was this book called How to Take a Japanese Bath from 92, and that had followed an earlier book about Japan. So I guess I wanted to transition here to your ongoing long-term relationship with this incredible country, Japan. I know that around age 16 or 17, you had been digging through this pile of books your dad brought home from Japan. These were books about traditional Japanese design and architecture. And then while you were studying at UCLA, you became interested in the Japanese tea house. Tell me about this journey into Japanese culture, how you think about it across time. It seems like it's this ongoing, enduring thing for you. And maybe how do you view about your, quote, Japan time, if I can call it that?
My mother and my stepfather were quite interested in Japanese art and design. And the home that I grew up in was definitely Japan influenced. So there's that basic familial veneration of things Japanese. We even had a Japanese gardener. This is not to say it sounds like we were rich. We were not rich. We were sort of just basic middle class, but there were certain aesthetic predispositions that my family had. I wanted to go to Japan when I was maybe a teenager, late teens, but my friends told me that it was horrible. Tokyo, the pollution was so bad. The policemen had to wear gas masks, and the traditional Japan that I was so fond of really didn't exist anymore. So I removed it from my list of things I wanted to do. When I was publishing Wet, lots of Japanese journalists came and were interested in Wet. Finally, we sold the licensing rights to manufacture clothing with the Wet logos in Japan. And I was curious, what is this culture about? It was no longer the traditional Japan I was interested in. It was contemporary Japan. I went during Wet time, and I was introduced to a lot of interesting people. It was great. I really liked the way that Japanese culture seemed to treat creators. Creators may not have made a lot of money, but they were accorded a degree of respect that they certainly weren't accorded in America then. If you couldn't make a lot of money for somebody in America, then you're not worth much. So when I stopped Wet, I wanted to spend more time in Japan, and did, and my life evolved. Wrote a book about Japanese fashion, and it was the first book I made, and it was great. experience was great. I ended up marrying a Japanese woman. We decided to divide our time between half a year in San Francisco, half the year in Tokyo. I wanted to penetrate deeper and deeper into the culture. And I think that the quintessential, ultimate deep dive resulted in the book Wabi-Sabi for artists, designers, poets, and philosophers. Eventually, I divorced that Japanese woman. My life in Japan came to an end. So although I still am grateful and very fond of many, many things Japanese, it is no longer a central focus of my life.
Mm-hmm. You did do the Wabi-Sabi Further Thoughts book, which came later.
I did.
Yeah.
The first Wabi-Sabi book, Wabi-Sabi was not an expression that was known outside of Japan. And it wasn't even used in Japan, except for a few aesthete types. So when I made the first book, I thought it would be extremely niche. And it was a book that I approached in a very pure way. A Japanese publisher was very interested in publishing it, but then they started making suggestions like, well, maybe you should have a color cover. Well, maybe your title is a little gawky. Maybe the black and white photographs inside are, they're a little bit depressing. And I realized that I had to publish it myself. And I'd done a lot of favors for the Shiseido Corporation. And I went to them and I said, Japanese, a little parenthetically, Japanese are very good at determining obligation and reciprocity. And so they determined that I had given them, it translated into X amount of money. So that's where the money for the first printing of Wabi-Sabi came out. I was very surprised that it resonated among the creative people in many places. I felt at some point when Wabi-Sabi, well, there's books like Wabi-Sabi and Your Relationship and Wabi-Sabi Dinnerware, and I decided that I had to go back and address some of the
misperceptions
that I had created too.
Yeah. I mean, there are so many different definitions in a way, and your book gets at that there are. Do you have a favorite, or how do you now define wabi-sabi?
Let me just be very clear. In Japanese, there is no term wabi-sabi, okay? There's an old word, wabi, and there's an old word, sabi. If you look in the Japanese dictionary, you won't find wabi-sabi, period. Maybe now, since it's so popular, yes. So I think of it just the most simple terms. It's the beauty of things imperfect, impermanent, and incomplete. And parenthetically, I would say that it's things of this nature, but in a particular context. And the context is a little tricky to describe or talk about, but I'd say that the imperfect, impermanent, incomplete is the good general description.
You first read about wabi-sabi, or at least this is what I found in the research, in Kokuro Kokuzo's The Book of Tea.
Well, yes and no. He never uses the word wabi or sabi. But I realized when I was deeper involved in Japanese society that was the feeling that he was trying to communicate. But even he wouldn't use the words wabi and sabi or conjoin them.
Well, I think this is so interesting about your work. I mean, this book is one example of putting to words something that even someone like Kokuzo couldn't quite communicate, or communicated without putting language to it. And I feel like your practice or your bookmaking, your sentence creating has been a sort of ongoing effort of putting language to things that creators, artists, others have long tried to perhaps find the right words for. Not really a question, more of an observation.
No, I think that's an interesting observation. I think what it's about is that I'm trying to figure out what's going on. I'm trying to figure out what is this world I exist in? Who am I? Where am I going? What does it mean? What is the purpose? So I've engaged in these explorations. And I think for myself, to focus on a particular term or to create a term that embodies or encapsulates a particular sensibility, it's been a compass for me to follow and ferret out the meaning of that thing.
Hey everyone, taking a quick break here to tell you a little bit about our Season 11 presenting sponsor, L'École School of Jewelry Arts, which is supported by the Maison Van Cleef and Arpels. In addition to its courses, lectures, publications, and other programming, L'École also produces a podcast called Voice of Jewels, which draws on knowledge from its lecturers, researchers, and other experts to uncover the stories and secrets behind history's most fascinating jewels. Season themes to date have included the blue diamond, jewels in comic books, talismans, and the relationship between jewelry and literature. For its 8th season, the series focuses on some of history's greatest treasure troves, from one found submerged in the Java Sea to another discovered inside Andy Warhol's New York apartment. To learn more about L'École and Voice of Jewels, head to www.l'ecolevancleefarpels.com. That's www.LECOLEVANCLEEFARPELS.com. You can also find Voice of Jewels on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And now, back to the episode. I found it interesting, too, that so much of your journey, in some sense, not every sense, of course, but some sense, did really begin with this fascination of the tea house. There's so much embedded in tea ceremony, in the tea house. And when I had the craft scholar Glenn Adamson on the show, we opened our conversation about this relationship between time and tea ceremony. He called the tea ceremony virtually unique in the world of craft in the sense that it's not multisensory, but all sensory. I wanted to ask you about the significance of tea ceremony for you, your life, your craft, the things you create and have done.
Yes, it's been very important. In many respects, the architecture of the tea ceremony, some of the most beautiful tea ceremony environments, they span a pretty big range of types. The ones that I was initially most drawn to were very almost primitive, but inside extremely refined. They're quiet, contemplative environments. The tea ceremony itself, the ritual, it's fussy, it's dated, it's beautiful, it's everything. In my own mind, I've deconstructed the tea ceremony ritual, and I think of it, well, let's get rid of the tea. Let's just make it a water ritual. In that kind of environment, what would it be? How would you do it? Because the tea itself, when I was first practicing tea ceremony, and now I wasn't drinking caffeine. And so in a caffeinated world, people probably don't realize how potent a drug caffeine is. But when you're in the tea ceremony and you're given this hyper dose of caffeine, all of a sudden everything becomes vivid. It's like the movies where it goes from black and white to color. So
shot to the head.
It's shot to the head, yeah. So everything is slowed down in the tea ceremony. You're focusing on a few objects, a few ritualized behavior or performance. Theoretically, the people there are all coming together in peace because it evolved during a time when there was a lot of warfare. Warrior class was very strong in Japan, and so the warriors would leave their swords and their knives outside the tea house, which was like, I heard that there's a steam room in Detroit that was established by Jewish gangsters. And because it was so hot, you didn't bring your gun in. So that's where they'd meet, So it's a place where you don't kill each other. Yeah, I'm very grateful to the tea ceremony. There's one sort of like the Jesus Christ or Michelangelo is probably a better analogy, of tea, Senno Rikyu. But there are actually many people who created the tea ceremony. sometimes it's just easier to just say one person, for rhetorical convenience, started something or brought it to its apotheosis. But that's not really the case. It was a group effort.
I thought we'd go back to your upbringing. What are your earliest aesthetic memories? What stands out to you?
Well, it's funny. My earliest one was, I was in kindergarten, and I went over to the house of this girl, Julie Aldridge, and Jill Warner. They were there, and there was a box of 64 Crayola crayons. And I'd never seen anything as wondrous before. And there were like 3 or 4 colors that were like erotic to me. And I thought the only solution was to steal them. And I didn't, I don't think. But that was...
you coveted them.
I coveted them.
Yeah.
And then a few years later, for some strange reason, I was fascinated by anesthesia. I particularly was captivated by the names of anesthetics, ether and xylocaine and procaine. I don't know why exactly, but this idea of sensation, removing sensation, consciousness, removing consciousness, it was just something that was fascinating to a 6 or 7-year-old, and a little odd now that I think about it. Well, actually, when I was 4, I swallowed a container of ant poison. And I remember quite clearly, I know memory is always reconstructed every time we recall it, but my memory is that I was in the backyard and I saw one of those little containers of ant poison, and I had it in my hand, and I thought, I'll take it because I'm going to go back to the place I was before. That's fine. And then I went in the house with the container in my hand, and I told my mother, and of course she freaked out, rushed to the hospital, had my stomach pumped. I think it's curious that I had this impulse to the nature of existence and the nature of pre-existence and the wonderness of just whatever it is. I don't even know if the meta-existence has always been something that it's part of it's very deep in me.
What about your earliest bathing memories?
The earliest one was, the earliest one was being kicked out of a children's pool or yelled at for peeing in it. I was pretty young then. I remember when I was 9 years old, we took a family trip to New York to visit some relatives, and one of my uncles took me to a bath house in Manhattan. I guess it must have been some Russian Jewish-like thing. There was a delicatessen. There was a resting room. It was just so exotic to me that this was like going into a totally foreign country where they do things in a different way. And then after that, I would say when I was a teenager, going to hot springs in California, very lucky to, I can't tell you how lucky I feel. When you say privileged to me, I was thinking about it this morning. It doesn't mean growing up in a wealthy family. I mean, that's a fucking curse in a way, in terms of finding yourself, because you think that money and things are the thing to have and you need more and more. No, being allowed to explore and being in an environment that's open environment and being exposed to nature, that is what I am incredibly grateful for. And I don't know why I'm so lucky. It's just luck of the draw, I guess.
Skipping ahead a little bit, I wanted to go to this book you did in 1991. It's this pamphlet-sized thing, but it has a lot to do with time and the mind. And it's called Noise Reduction, a 10-minute meditation for quieting the mind. And in it, I know you wrote that this was a practice you'd been doing for years. I don't know if this is something you still practice today, but I just wanted to bring it up because it was interesting. This is 1991, and even back then, you wrote, "Noise, the ongoing mental chatter and low-level psychic static you never seem to be able to turn off, is an unhealthy byproduct of our fast-paced, overstimulated daily lives." That was then. And I think about now, post-iPad, post-iPhone, our devices in our pockets, pinging us all the time. I wanted to ask about that book, thinking back, because it is this magical little pamphlet. I've tried it and it works. And it's this great practice. I think more of us should do it, honestly. Could you share this technique with the listeners and maybe just share a bit about how you came to?
I don't remember the exact technique. I mean, I kind of vaguely do, but I'll just say that I'm sure many of your listeners meditate, have a meditation practice, and I have too. And the meditation style that has worked best for me, or works best for me, is just Zen meditation, where I just watch my breathing. And it's, of course, much easier said than done initially. If I'm going to share something with somebody, it should be honest, because there's so much dishonesty in the world being shared and propagated. I feel just kind of a moral responsibility. It's not like moral thinking about it. It's just, that's just the way I was raised, that we have a responsibility to make the world a better place, not by making a new app, but by being honest and true to, this sounds really corny, true to humanistic values. So that book was an attempt to do. I like making books. I need to do something with my creative energy and give purpose and meaning to my life and a way of making a living. So I made this book. I made it with St. Martin's Press. I was a little naive about the contract. The cover that I had designed, they didn't like, so they had the right to make a cover. The book was manufactured in a different size than the one I had designed. It was, from a book publishing point of view or experience, it was horrendous and very painful for me. And thereafter, I decided to embark on the path of independent publishing.
Another book that I got my hands on in preparation for our conversation today, also from 1991, is one you co-authored called The Haggler's Handbook. Uh-huh. This thing, it's pretty amazing. The subtitle is 1 Hour to Negotiating Power.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring it up because it is, I don't know, I think the deeper I've gotten into my own career and learned how to manage and run a business, I was like, damn, I wish I had this book like a few years ago, because there's just so many tips in there that I think really, some of them are reflections on time even, but just how to interact well with somebody you might deem a quote opponent or someone you're in a negotiation with. One of the things that I loved was how you wrote that human interaction is in large part nothing but a series of negotiated arguments. And this notion of conscious negotiation, which is not taking yourself too seriously, learning to stay loose, that this makes you a better player, negotiator. There's also the notion of what you call the risk zone. Negotiation is a process, you write, between the action and the result is a span of time we call the risk zone. And I think about that span of time. It is so important. How you play that risk zone is everything. And I'll just do one last one here, which is you write about silence as a strategy tool, which is also something I employ here on Time Sensitive. The sentence that I pulled out is, silence often prompts the other side to speak and may result in their revealing useful information.
So, yes, this is a funny book. In terms of books, my first book was a book about Japanese fashion at a seminal moment in Japanese fashion. And it was a wonderful experience. And it pointed the way to books as a medium that I felt most compatible with my way of being and my way of operating. After that, I made a book after the fashion book, I made a book called 283 Useful Ideas from Japan. So I was living in Japan. There were all these interesting service, product, communication ideas. It was a fun book to do. I worked with a manga artist on it, and it was a lot of fun. I did a few books in a time where I was trying to figure out who I was or what I was, and I thought of myself for a brief period of time as an information designer or information architect. And so I thought, well, as an information design exercise, what would be a good book to do? So I went to a bookstore and looked at all the genres, and it said, oh, okay, negotiating. Oh, yeah, there's some great books there. Maybe I could do a book that is, you could assimilate all the information even faster and with a little bit of humor. So that's how the concept for that book came about. That is not the way I conceive of books now. I'd say that after the meditation book, my process of determining subject matter totally changed. It has to be personally relevant to me, and it has to help me further my search for who I am and nature of existence. But it was a fun book to do, and negotiation is important. But I'd say that the one takeaway, the biggest takeaway from that, for me, the whole thing, is that the best frame of mind to have when negotiating is that you don't give a shit. In other words, if things go south, you don't care. In other words, I'm really not that attached to it, so I'm going to ask for this. Because when you're attached to it, I must have this, I must have this, then you're in a very vulnerable place.
Oh, man, beautiful. And there's so many other places I want to go with this conversation. And you've done so many books. 2005, you did a book called The Flower Shop about this retail operation in Vienna called Blumencraft. You also, of course, have done so much about aesthetics, including your book on creating things aesthetic and Which Aesthetics Do You Mean? Another book. Maybe we'll point to the aesthetics tip, which I think all three of the books I just mentioned kind of connect to. And I would say all your work, or most of your work anyway, is in the realm of aesthetics, is dealing on some level with defining this subject, exploring it. Maybe the latter two, when it comes to the word aesthetics, there are many definitions, similar to Wabi-Sabi perhaps. Which is your favorite? How do you think about the definition of aesthetics?
My favorite one really is one that I discovered in New York maybe 30 years ago. There was some wacky organization. Well, that's demeaning. There was an organization in Soho that its mission was to basically educate people about the relationship of aesthetics and psychological health, or the integration of the self as an aesthetic enterprise. What I realized for myself is that my life is essentially an aesthetic experience. Everything that I know, everything I take in, every idea I have comes to me through my senses. And then it's processed. I think about it, I might smell it. I mean, smell it in the metaphorical sense and in the actual sense. I look at it also in both senses of the word. So that's my favorite definition of the word, that it's basically, it's the context, let's say the intellectual and the sensual context in which life is lived.
Hey everyone, taking another quick break here to tell you about our weekly newsletter, where I share a behind-the-scenes look into each time-sensitive episode, and where we also get into various things in the cultural sphere our team at The Slowdown is paying attention to. You can sign up and join our 13,000 plus other subscribers by going to slowdown.media/newsletter. That's slowdown.media/newsletter. And now, back to the episode. On Creating Things Aesthetic, you write about this experience of moving from Marin County in California to this small hilltop town in Italy, and then ultimately to Rome. This California to Italy period, I wanted to sort of dig into this period of time for you, and if you felt a temporal shift or what it felt like to move from California to Rome, and how do you define your Rome time?
I'm one of these people who never felt that any one place was my home. The closest I came to is when we lived in this narrow canyon in Los Angeles in the Japanese-style house, and there were 300 acres of wilderness behind us. Our neighbor was a lawyer, part of a development team to develop that land eventually, many years after we lived there, into what was going to be the Beverly Hills Golf Course or Country Club, which went bankrupt, and then ultimately they built houses there. I saw how easily it is to destroy the earth. This was my sacred place, and then I saw the bulldozers come in, and at the time I wasn't traumatized, but I think it's been it's kind of a very deep, let's say, affectless trauma that I've experienced, that I see that we humans are so powerful now that we could destroy nature, we could destroy ourselves, and we don't seem to care. I mean, we're like nuts. What was your question?
I was asking you about California to Rome.
Okay.
Which connects to this, actually.
Yeah. So anyway, after Wet, I felt liberated from Los Angeles, which, again, I'm very grateful for the experience of having grown up in Los Angeles. But after Wet, I felt irrelevant in LA. I wasn't, like many of my friends, I wasn't in the film business. I wasn't in TV. I wasn't in real estate. I wasn't a doctor. What am I? So I moved to San Francisco, which at the time seemed like the quintessential iconic city. It had a real center. And I had a life in San Francisco for many years, maybe 40 years, in the Bay Area, Marin County. But the character of the Bay Area changed quite a bit. I never felt entirely at home there because LA is a little bit more of a raucous, freeform kind of place, very inventive, very open. And San Francisco is maybe politically liberal, but socially conservative. And no matter what it sounds, the hippies and the, gay baths and everything like that, it's still socially conservative in my frame of references. So when the tech mentality just totally permeated every aspect of life in the Bay Area, I became incredibly bored. When COVID happened, my wife, who was raised in Rome, said, between us, we said, well, maybe this is the time to have that 1 year sabbatical that we've talked about with our son, who is a teenager. And online school wasn't working for him. My wife's parents were getting older. There's a part of her soul that was still in Rome. Again, I was bored. So I said, let's do it. And so in 1 month from that decision, we packed up our home and put everything in storage and moved to Rome. Oh, yeah. The one little tiny detail. 10 years earlier, my wife, by the way, this is my Italian wife, not my Japanese wife. My Japanese wife, long gone. Yeah. My Italian wife said, why don't you just apply for Italian citizenship? I said, well, what for? I don't want to live in Europe. And she said, you never know. And so I did. And in the marvelous Italian way, I applied. And then they said, well, in 3 years, we'll give you an answer. And I said, well, what's the tracking number? I said, no, there's no number. There's not. Well, what's the reference number? No, nothing. It's just, we'll let you know. Miraculously, they did let me know after 3 years. During COVID, we went to Italy as repatriating Italians. The planes were empty. It was nice. Italy was hit very hard by COVID, but in the little village that we initially resided in, her mother and father each had places there. So everything was very rational. We think of the Italians as being, exuberantly irrational sometimes, but it was very, during COVID, it felt very secure, safe and secure, the way they handled it. And at first, there were the frustrations of the dysfunctions of Italian life and the taxation system, etc. But then we moved to Rome because our son's school was in Rome, and the schlep every day was too much. I never liked Rome. It was an unmodern city, etc., etc. I only liked modern cities. But I began to realize that, oh, this is the other side of the picture. This is the other side of the modern world, the world that, I don't know how to explain it exactly, but in Rome, the people are not aspiring to become machines. That was what I felt people were aspiring to back in the Bay Area. They didn't know it consciously maybe, but with every app, with every time you have to change your password and go through some digital protocol to get to something, you're becoming a machine. And so I feel like, wow, I'm living with human beings who are maybe not as quick, clever, witty, or amusing as my American compatriots, but I feel it's a saner and slower life. For this phase of my life, it's quite suitable.
I think a city, too, that really respects its place in the world and in history and its sense of the past.
Well, that's what anchors it to the past. I mean, that's, on one hand, you could say it's too much. I mean, come on. That was 2,000 years ago. You were great. You're not great anymore. You're just some tourist trap now. There's a Rome that's not the tourist Rome, too. Although I like the tourist Rome, too. I like going between the two. It means like you could, I'll be a tourist. I'll see something I haven't seen before, and that's fun too.
I have a closing question for you, which I'm going to bring up that 2005 New York Times story again that Pilar wrote. Thinking about time, it's 20 years ago, and in it you said, "The reason I make books is to escape the tyranny of things." You called the iPod, to quote the author, Pilar, an example of something that isolates people and prevents them from engaging fully in civic life. And you noted how you deplore society's, quote, headlong rush into sameness. Some of the things you sort of just said when we were talking about Rome and California. So I guess 20 years later, how do you see things? Is the world generally where you thought it would be that back then? And where do you think we stand?
We have a collage a friend made of Giotto's Lamentation in our bedroom, except our friend took the painting, the poster of the painting, and made it people, instead of Christ, there's the world. I cry for everything, on some deep level, but I also have my guiding motto in life is there's no upside to pessimism. So I'm optimistic, but rationally, it doesn't make sense.
You love a good endnote. So all of your books have endnotes, and they're really good, actually. I would say anyone who picks up one of Leonard's books, definitely read the endnotes because you get a second reading of the book. Are there any endnotes you would like to share with the listeners today based on our conversation?
No, I'm really happy to meet you in person and be in your lovely space. It's been fun. Thank you.
Thanks, Leonard. Extra thanks to our Season 11 presenting sponsor, L'Ecole School of Jewelry Arts, which is supported by the Maison Van Cleef and Arpels. A unique place for learning online and offline, L'Ecole welcomes the general public to the world of jewelry through courses, talks, exhibitions, videos, books, and its Voice of Jewels podcast. You can find out more about L'Ecole at www.lecolevancleefarpels.com. That's www.lecolevancleefarpels.com. And thank you for listening. You can find more episodes of Time Sensitive on our website, timesensitive.fm, or wherever you listen to podcasts. To keep up with our latest time-sensitive episodes and get behind-the-scenes updates, sign up for our newsletter at slowdown.media/newsletter. That's slowdown.media/newsletter. You can follow us on Instagram at slowdown.media. Our theme music was composed by Billy Martin. This episode was produced by Ramon Broza, Mimi Hannon, Emily McDonald, Kylie McConville, and Johnny Simon.